Lady Evelyn, know this, our union is a mere contract. Let not your heart dare to hope for more. I cannot, will not, remain under the same roof as you any longer, Lady Evelyn. The words struck her like flint against glass, sharp, unyielding, and impossible to ignore. A hush fell over the ballroom, and even the chandeliers seemed to quiver in sympathy, their crystals catching the gaslight in trembling reflections. Evelyn Ashcroft, barely 19, stood frozen in the center of a room that had moments before hummed with polite laughter and the soft scrape of satin skirts. The Duke of Wretham's voice was calm, almost courteous, but the ice beneath it spoke louder than any storm. She felt it in her chest, in the sudden hollowing of her stomach, the rapid, uneven pulse against her ribs. She had been warned, in whispers of course, society's cruel habit of foretelling disasters through veiled commentaries, but nothing had prepared her for the inevitability of this moment. The Duke, tall and severe, his coat black as midnight and embroidered with gold that glimmered under the light, was the last person who should have delivered such a verdict. Yet here he was, his eyes fixed on her with a mixture of cold resolve and something else she could not name, a flicker of regret perhaps, or a hesitation swallowed too quickly. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the edges of her lace gloves. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the invisible pressure of every gaze in the room pressing down upon her. The whispers, once distant and harmless, now felt like daggers, cutting along the curve of her spine, tracing invisible scars upon her dignity. The whispered rumors, the polite half-gazes, the letters of quiet suspicion that had arrived in the last fortnight, all of it coalesced into this singular, undeniable truth. She was being cast aside, dismissed, deemed unworthy of even the semblance of respect. Your presence at Wretham Hall is no longer necessary. Nor desirable, he continued, his voice as smooth and relentless as polished marble. Each syllable seemed meticulously measured, leaving no room for appeal, no crack in the armor of inevitability. She wanted to speak, to cry out that some mistake had been made, that the world could not be so cruel, that the contract they had so recently signed, the binding, silent arrangement that had promised stability if nothing else, could not be severed in a single breath. But the words would not come. Her tongue felt swollen, heavy with the bitter taste of disbelief, and so she remained silent, dignified in outward form, shattered within. The ballroom seemed to close around her, the laughter fading into a distant hum, the chandeliers tilting in mockery. The Duke's jaw tightened, and for the briefest moment, his usual composure faltered, revealing the man beneath the title, the man capable of longing, regret, perhaps even guilt. Yet it was gone as quickly as it appeared, masked again by the inevitability of duty and pride. He could not, would not, show weakness here, not in front of them all. Not when the eyes of London and of the entire county rested upon Wretham Hall. Evelyn's gaze drifted to the assembled guests. Faces blurred, expressions unreadable behind the veneers of etiquette. Some avoided her eyes, others watched too closely, as if waiting for the moment she would collapse under the weight of humiliation. She imagined the whispered conversations that would ripple through the city. She is discarded, a cautionary tale. How quickly favor can fade. And she could not help but feel a surge of fury, mingled with despair. Society had its rules and she had, in some unknowable way, transgressed them. Yet to be shunned, cast aside, as though her heart and dignity could be measured and found wanting, it was more than she had anticipated. She straightened, her shoulders lifting in a final act of defiance. The silk of her gown, once a comforting embrace, now felt like a cage. I'm not. The thought began, unformed, fragile. She would not allow herself to crumble entirely. She would leave with as much grace as she could muster, even if her heart was a tempest of sorrow. The Duke's gaze followed her every movement. There was a tension there, almost imperceptible, that spoke of a bond beyond social contracts and whispered rumors. It was there in the slight tightening of his hands at his sides, in the brief hesitation of his step backward as if part of him wished to reach out, to stop her. But he did not. He could not. The world demanded he be resolute. Society required him to be unyielding. And so, he remained a pillar of composure, while she felt the very ground beneath her threaten to vanish. Evelyn turned toward the door, each step measured, deliberate, a silent testament to the dignity she was determined to preserve. The murmurs followed her like shadows, curling around her ankles, brushing her hair, caressing her ears with reminders of failure and disgrace. She could feel their weight, the cumulative judgment of 1,000 unseen eyes, yet she moved forward. Each step was an act of quiet rebellion, each breath a refusal to let the world see her collapse. The rain had begun outside, pattering against the carriage windows in soft, insistent rhythms. It was a small mercy, she thought, that no one would see the tears that threatened to spill over, nor hear the silent sobs restrained behind a veil of polished manners. She could already hear the carriage's wheels crunching over the gravel, carrying her away from this hall of judgment, this theater of society's cruel games. Yet even as she left, a piece of her remained trapped in the ballroom, suspended in the sharp echo of the Duke's words, and in the memory of the brief, unguarded flicker of his eyes that suggested the possibility of something lost, perhaps irretrievably. As the door closed behind her, muffling the gasp of the assembled crowd, the Duke's hand brushed against a single white rose resting on the table. He did not pick it up. He did not move. He remained still, as though rooted to the floor by the weight of what he had done and what he might have spared. Outside, the rain began to intensify, each drop a quiet, relentless reminder that the world did not pause for grief, nor for love abandoned. And Evelyn, alone in the carriage, felt the first trembling acknowledgement of a truth she had long denied, that some losses could not be reclaimed, that the path before her was uncertain, and that the man who had once been everything to her, the Duke of Wretham, had severed the tie between them with a single, unflinching pronouncement. Yet beneath the layers of humiliation and sorrow, beneath the frost of society's judgment, a spark persisted. A spark that whispered even now that this was not the end, that the story between them was far from finished, and that the heart, even when betrayed, could still bear witness to its own stubborn, relentless hope. The carriage rolled forward, and Evelyn pressed her gloved hands to her lap, staring into the wet night. Somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of a rose petal falling against marble seemed to mark the beginning of a reckoning yet to come. The letter arrived on a Monday, perfumed and edged with gold, and with it came the cruel reminder that some chains, though unseen, could still bind the heart. Evelyn's hands shook as she tore the seal, the fragile paper crackling beneath her fingers like brittle glass. The words within were precise, cold, and deliberate, yet every line radiated the unspoken weight of the Duke's regret. I cannot undo what has been done, nor the decision I have taken. Yet know this, not a day passes without thought of you, nor without the hope that you are unharmed. A tremor ran through her chest, equal parts anger and longing, and she pressed the note to her lips, tasting the faint scent of cedarwood and ink. That he had sent a message, however veiled, was both a balm and a torment. She was reminded, painfully, of the world she had fled, the glittering halls of Wretham Hall, the murmurs of society, and the unbearable weight of a name that had once promised safety but had delivered humiliation instead. Her new life, though quieter, offered no true refuge. The countryside estate where she had taken residence was modest, yet respectable. The hearth could warm her body but not her fractured pride. Servants moved with polite discretion, their eyes respectfully lowered, yet gossip followed her like shadowed footsteps. A single comment, a whispered question through the hedge or across the village green, could undo months of careful composure. Every smile she offered to neighbors or the occasional visitor was measured, precise, rehearsed, yet even these small gestures felt like battles waged against the tide of rumor. And then there were the gifts. They arrived without preamble, always when she was least prepared, always stirring that turbulent mix of irritation and yearning. A locket, small and silver, engraved with the initials E.W., delicate enough to slip into her palm unnoticed. A book of poetry, leather-bound, with a faint scent of tobacco and old paper clinging to the pages. Each object was a silent confession, an unspoken plea, and Evelyn despised them as much as she craved them. The gifts reminded her that he existed still, that he watched, that his influence reached into the quiet corners of her existence even as she struggled to reclaim it. Yet the village, though seemingly distant, could not shelter her entirely from the eyes of society. Letters arrived at odd intervals, bearing the delicate marks of acquaintances who felt compelled to comment on her situation. Some were polite, laden with euphemisms and gentle warnings. Others were more direct, filled with insinuations and judgments. She is alone, abandoned. What has become of the Duke's choice? Is she regretting the folly of youth? The words gnawed at her, a persistent ache that could not be soothed by quiet reflection or careful management of her days. It was during one of these long afternoons, when the sky was slate-gray and the wind carried the distant cry of a crow across the moors, that Evelyn felt the first undeniable stirrings of change within her. At first it was subtle, a faint nausea, a deepened weariness, a quiet shift in the rhythm of her heart. She resisted the notion, telling herself that it was fanciful, a trick of the mind, a bodily rebellion against grief. But as the hours passed, the certainty grew impossible to deny. She was with child. The knowledge landed upon her like a stone dropped into calm water, sending concentric waves of fear, disbelief, and a faint, stubborn hope through every nerve. The realization did not bring joy, society would not view her condition kindly, and the thought of the Duke, distant and imposing, brought an ache she could scarcely bear. And yet, beneath the panic, there was a fragile seed of determination. She would endure. She would protect this life, this small miracle, regardless of scandal, judgment, or the relentless march of time. Her hands rested upon her abdomen, a gentle, trembling caress, and for the first time in months she felt a tether to the world, to the possibility of love rekindled in forms subtle and unseen. Days passed, each marked by careful observation and silent preparation. Evelyn walked the gardens with measured steps, spoke to the servants with soft courtesy, and arranged her new quarters to ensure privacy, comfort, and dignity. The locket lay close to her heart, the poetry book on her bedside table, each object a reminder of what had been lost and what might yet endure. Every moment carried the weight of anticipation, the quiet tension of a life being quietly rewritten beneath her steady, vigilant hands. And then, inevitably, the village began to stir with its usual curiosity. A carriage passed near the estate, a note delivered by a messenger with deliberate slowness. Each arrival, each unexpected visitor brought a fresh wave of anxiety. Evelyn learned to guard herself not only from the eyes of strangers but from the creeping doubt within her own heart. She became a master of composure, a scholar of patience, and yet the ache for understanding, for connection, for the faintest acknowledgement from the man who had torn her life apart, never diminished. One afternoon, as she sat by the window tracing the delicate patterns of frost upon the glass, a shadow fell across the sill. She turned, startled, to find a small, folded note, placed there without flourish, yet unmistakably his handwriting. I have heard whispers of the world, Evelyn. I know you bear burdens unseen and I cannot remain idle. I wish only for your safety, and for the protection of what you carry. Her breath caught. The words were neither apology nor promise, yet they carried a weight impossible to ignore. Rage rose first, hot and searing, demanding to know why he had not acted sooner, why he had left her to navigate the storm of shame alone. And yet, beneath the anger, a quiet longing stirred, subtle and insistent. He was present in this gesture, watching from afar, acknowledging her pain, and, though she dared not hope too boldly, offering a lifeline through the suffocating fog of social scrutiny. Evelyn pressed the note to her lips, tears burning behind closed eyes, and felt the first undeniable flicker of resolve. She would endure, she decided, but she would not ignore the complexity of the man who had caused her both despair and longing. She would watch, she would wait, she would protect herself and the life forming quietly within her. And she knew, with a mingling of fear and anticipation, that he would not remain distant forever. The locket rested against her heart once more, cold metal against warm flesh, a reminder of promises made and broken, and of the fragile bond that had never been entirely severed. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees as though carrying secrets she could not yet name. Evelyn's fingers traced the edge of the note, lingering upon the letters that bore the weight of his concern. Somewhere beyond the village, beyond the quiet fields and rolling hills, the Duke of Wretham remained, watching, judging, yearning, and for the first time since that dreadful night in the ballroom, she allowed herself to imagine a reckoning yet to come. And beneath the fragile shell of her carefully maintained composure, a thought trembled, both terrifying and exhilarating, that the world she had fled might not have finished with her, that the Duke's presence, his intentions, and the life she carried might converge in ways she could neither predict nor control, and that the next encounter would not be merely chance, it would be destiny. He appeared without warning, standing at the edge of the chapel's worn stone steps, and the world seemed to shift beneath Evelyn's feet. One moment she was alone, tracing the intricate patterns of frost along the windowsill. The next, the Duke of Wretham was there, as imposing and relentless as ever, yet somehow more vulnerable than she had ever imagined. Her breath caught between indignation and something more dangerous, something that whispered of old longing, of regrets unspoken. "Lady Evelyn," he said, voice steady yet tremulous, "I had not expected you." Her hand instinctively clutched the folds of her gown, not for warmth, but as a shield against the torrent of emotions threatening to unravel her carefully constructed composure. "Nor I you, your grace," she replied, her tone courteous, formal, but beneath it lay the tremor of something she could scarcely name. The words were polite, but every syllable bore the weight of months spent in exile, of letters read and reread, of nights haunted by memory and remorse. He stepped closer, though cautiously, measuring the distance between them with a care that made her pulse quicken. The air seemed charged, thick with things unsaid, with histories both shared and fractured. Evelyn felt the old ache, the ache of rejection, of humiliation, of pride wounded, but mingled with it was a strange, quiet hope. The Duke's eyes, usually imperious, softened with a weighty curiosity, as though he sought permission to traverse the chasm between them without disturbing the fragile dignity she had rebuilt. "I hear whispers, Evelyn," he began, the words careful, deliberate. "I know the world has been unkind. I know you endure more than any person should. And yet, I could not remain idle." Her lips parted, and for a heartbeat she wanted to speak, to demand why now, after months of absence, he appeared before her with words so measured they cut deeper than any accusation could. Yet she contained herself, bowing slightly, a gesture of courtesy that belied the storm within. "Your concern, though noted, is appreciated." The hesitation was intentional, revealing her struggle to reconcile anger and longing, pride and vulnerability. He studied her, gaze lingering upon the curve of her shoulders, the tilt of her chin, the steady control of her hands, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the losses, the dangers, and the unrelenting social pressures that had driven them apart. He lowered his voice, almost to a whisper, as though confiding a secret meant for her ears alone. "Evelyn, I have heard, and I fear the truth I did not wish to confront until now." She braced herself, sensing that revelation was imminent, and the familiar tension of their past, of contracts signed in cold ink and promises made under duress, wrapped around her heart. "Your Grace?" she prompted softly, allowing only the barest hint of inquiry. The world seemed to narrow, the chapel's walls closing in with the weight of expectation and consequence. I know you bear more than you should," he said finally, a tremor betraying the armor of composure he so carefully maintained. "You carry a life, our life, within you." Time fractured in that instant. Her breath caught, sharp and jagged. Her hands pressed instinctively to the small swell of her abdomen, a gesture both protective and instinctual. The world spun, not with fear alone, but with the dizzying swirl of something altogether new, recognition, acknowledgement, and the faintest flicker of hope. She had imagined this moment, yes, in quiet desperation, but to hear it spoken aloud, from the man who had shattered her heart and reclaimed her presence without permission, it was more than she could contain. He stepped closer still, not intruding, but close enough that the space between them hummed with the gravity of unspoken emotion. "I have been a fool, Evelyn. I allowed pride, duty, and the weight of society's expectations to dictate my choices, when my heart—" his voice faltered, as if admitting the truth were an act of audacious vulnerability. "When my heart has never forgotten you." Anger rose, swift and undeniable, cutting through the haze of shock and longing. "You left me," she exclaimed, voice trembling yet firm. "You cast me aside without a word beyond that damning decree. Do you imagine that my pride, my dignity, could survive the cruelty of such abandonment?" His jaw tightened and his eyes darkened, not with anger but with the burden of remorse. "I did not know how to act otherwise," he admitted. "I believed it was the only way to preserve what remained of your honor, of mine. Yet each day apart has been a torment I would scarcely endure again." Silence fell between them, heavy, laden with histories, regrets, and the impossible weight of emotion neither dared to name aloud. Evelyn's chest heaved with the effort of restraint, her mind awash with visions of letters read, gifts sent and returned, nights spent pacing in quiet despair. Yet even amid the storm of recollection, a fragile thread of understanding began to form, a recognition that neither time nor distance could sever the bond that had once been, and that perhaps, beneath the torment and humiliation, there existed a possibility of reconciliation, however tentative. She began, her voice breaking despite herself, "I am, with child." The words were uttered in a whisper, fragile and trembling, as though the mere act of speaking might shatter the reality she had so carefully protected. Her eyes, wide and luminous, sought his reaction, not in accusation but in desperate need for acknowledgement, for the faintest spark of hope that he might understand, that he might care. The Duke's expression faltered, a fleeting shadow of disbelief crossing his otherwise imperturbable features. Then slowly recognition softened his gaze and something deeper, fear, awe, reverence, took its place. "Evelyn, oh my God," he murmured as if the words themselves carried weight too immense to speak plainly. He stepped closer, extending a hand that trembled ever so slightly, and for a brief instant, the air between them seemed to crackle with possibility, fragile and electric. Yet neither moved immediately, both hesitant, aware that society, rumor, and the past's rigid chains threatened to intrude even upon this private confession. The chapel, silent and empty save for the echo of their voices, bore witness to the truth that had remained hidden for months, waiting to be acknowledged. And in that suspended moment, Evelyn felt a tremor of fear mingle with a surge of courage. The courage to confront the man who had caused her despair, and to trust for the first time in months, that he might not reject what was theirs by right of blood and heart alike. The Duke's eyes searched hers, unrelenting and yet not unkind. I will protect you, he said, voice low and resolute, carrying the weight of a promise made not lightly. Whatever the world whispers, whatever it demands, I will not abandon you again. I swear it, Evelyn. You and this child, our child, are under my care, and none shall harm you while I breathe. She felt the truth of the words settle over her like a fragile mantle, and a tear slipped down her cheek, not of sorrow alone but of relief, of the acknowledgement that, despite everything, some tether of hope remained. Yet as the words hung in the cold, still air, Evelyn realized with a pang that society's judgment had not vanished, that danger, scrutiny, and whispered censure still lingered beyond these walls, and that the road ahead would demand courage, cunning, and patience beyond what she had yet summoned. And as the Duke's hand hovered, uncertain, above hers, neither claiming nor retreating, a thought surged through her mind, both terrifying and exhilarating, that the world outside would not wait, and that the next choice they made together would shape not only their fates but the fragile life already growing between them. He appeared at the garden gate without announcement, the late afternoon sun casting his shadow long and stern across the path, and Evelyn felt the air shift with the weight of inevitability. The Duke of Wretham, impossibly tall, impossibly deliberate, was there, his presence a declaration in itself, and the wind seemed to carry the echo of every argument, every whispered accusation, every stolen glance they had ever exchanged. She froze mid-step, hands pressed lightly to her abdomen, a gesture half protective, half reverent, and the world narrowed to the space between them, electric and unyielding. Evelyn, he said, voice low, urgent, cutting through the quiet like a blade, we can no longer pretend that distance or decorum or the world's incessant judgment can absolve us of what is true. Whatever folly or error I have committed, it matters not now. I speak plainly, you and our child are mine to protect. Her breath hitched. She had prepared herself for measured visits, for letters veiled in poetry, for reminders that he remained present yet untouchable. But this direct confrontation, this open declaration, struck her like lightning. Her mind raced, torn between outrage at his presumption and relief at his acknowledgement, her chest constricted by the invisible chains of both emotion and propriety. You speak as though I am yours to command, she said, each word deliberate, formal, yet trembling with unbidden emotion. Do not mistake my patience for submission, your grace. I am neither a prize nor a responsibility to be claimed at will. He inclined his head slightly, a shadow of a wry smile crossing his otherwise austere features. I would not presume, Evelyn. I merely speak of truth, of what must be acknowledged, lest we remain prisoners of fear and society's suffocating gaze. I care not for appearances in this moment. I care only for what is real. Anger and longing warred within her, each pulse a testament to the months of separation and the quiet despair that had taken residence in her heart. And yet, beneath the layers of fear and fury, there stirred a fragile, persistent hope. He had come not to command nor to judge, but to offer protection, recognition, and perhaps something more. A chance at reclamation not of what had been lost but of what might still be theirs. The world will not forgive easily, she said, voice softening despite herself. Even if you wish to shield me, even if you declare loyalty, there are whispers, rumors, eyes that will not look kindly upon our actions. He stepped closer, deliberate, each movement measured to avoid intrusion, yet charged with undeniable intent. Let the world whisper, he said, his tone firm, resonant. Let it speak its judgment, for I will answer only for my own conscience. Whatever society deems scandal, whatever tradition decrees unfit, matters less than the truth between us. You and this child are under my protection, and I shall brook no interference. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs, a chaotic rhythm of fear, relief, and a longing she could scarcely name. She felt the weight of his gaze, unflinching, unwavering, yet tempered with tenderness, and for a moment, the tension that had defined their separation softened, though it did not vanish entirely. She could almost believe in that charged stillness, that the world might be held at bay, that the past's cruel judgments could be momentarily suspended, and that the Duke of Wretham, imposing and formidable, had returned not merely to observe but to act. You speak of protection, she whispered almost involuntarily, yet words are not enough. How am I to trust that promises, even spoken so boldly, will be honored when we are apart? His expression darkened, the shadow of resolve settling over his features like a cloak. I would not have come, he said softly, if I had not intended to act. Actions, Evelyn, not words, shall mark my sincerity. And I intend to ensure that no harm comes to you, nor to the life you carry, nor to the bond that, despite every attempt, has endured between us. Her hands trembled as she pressed them together, the weight of months spent in exile and worry converging into a single potent realization. He had returned, not for appearances, not for societal obligation, but for her, for the child, for the truth that had been denied between them. And in that realization, fear mingled with something altogether unfamiliar yet intoxicating. A cautious, desperate hope that they might yet navigate the impossible path laid before them. You speak boldly, Your Grace, she said, voice fragile yet resolute. And yet, the world beyond these walls is neither idle nor forgiving. Can your conviction withstand their scrutiny, their relentless gaze? His eyes, sharp and unflinching, met hers with the full force of his intention. It must, he said simply. If my heart, my honor, my very life cannot withstand the world to protect you and our child, then it is of no worth. I will not falter, Evelyn. You have my word. The words struck her like fire, warming even as they burned, a delicate conflagration that left her both weakened and strengthened. For months she had endured isolation, whispers, and the gnawing ache of absence. Now, standing before the man who had both destroyed and shaped her destiny, she felt the fragile stirrings of agency return. She could choose, she could resist, she could temper hope with caution, yet she could no longer deny the profound pull of their shared history and the life they had begun, even in secrecy and pain. He reached toward her, not pressing, merely extending the possibility of connection, a gesture charged with promise yet restrained by respect. Evelyn, he said, voice low and almost reverent, allow me to stand by you. Allow me to act, to prove that the bond between us is more than circumstance, more than rumor, more than past failures. Let me show you that even in a world intent on judgment, there can be loyalty, courage, and love. Her gaze dropped briefly, considering the ground between them, the months of suffering, the uncertain path ahead. And yet, when she lifted her eyes again, they met his with a faint, trembling acknowledgement of possibility. A silent, fragile pact formed in that gaze, one that did not yet erase the scars, but promised confrontation with them together. The sound of distant carriage wheels reached her ears, a subtle reminder that the world beyond their secluded garden still turned. Still waited, still demanded reckoning. She felt the tension tighten once more, the reminder that their reunion was neither complete nor uncontested. And as the Duke's hand lingered near hers, neither claiming nor retreating, Evelyn knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her. That the true test of their bond, the ultimate confrontation with society's scrutiny, and the acknowledgement of what they carried between them, had not yet arrived. And in the silence that stretched between them, heavy, potent, and unbroken, a thought trembled, bright and fragile. That the next step, whether taken together or forced apart, would determine not only their fates but the life quietly growing, a miracle that demanded courage, reckoning, and the unwavering truth of hearts reunited yet untested. The door burst open, and the world shifted as though the very air had been rewritten. Duke Rhythm stood in the threshold, rain-slicked cloak clinging to his shoulders, eyes wide and unblinking, and for a heartbeat, Evelyn thought the earth itself had paused. She cradled the small, fragile bundle to her chest, the infant's soft breaths stirring against her heart, and felt the weight of months, the anguish, the longing, the unrelenting judgment, condense into this singular, unbearable moment. You have kept him safe, the Duke breathed, voice trembling with a mixture of awe, fear, and relief. Evelyn. She pressed the child closer, not in defiance but in instinctive protection. The faint weight of tiny limbs, the warmth radiating from the infant's skin, reminded her of everything she had endured alone. The whispered gossip, the letters that spoke of scandal, the solitude of long nights when hope seemed impossible. Her voice was steady, though her heart quivered. He is safe, Your Grace. I have done what was necessary to protect him. The Duke stepped forward, but not immediately. He measured each motion, careful not to startle either mother or child, aware that the fragility before him demanded reverence. His gaze swept over Evelyn, drinking in her composed posture, the quiet dignity she had preserved despite every hardship, and the unspoken knowledge that she had endured far more than any society ought to allow. You, he murmured, voice catching, have endured more than I ever imagined. And yet here you stand, unbroken and with him. She met his eyes, the storm of months reflected in their depths. The judgment, the longing, the anger, and most quietly, the hope. I did what I must, she said softly, tone even, though her pulse thundered in her ears. Not for you nor for society but for him. He has no choice in the cruelties of the world. He deserves better than whispers and shame. He swallowed hard, the tremor in his jaw betraying the rigid control he normally exercised. And he shall have it, he said firmly, though it came more as a vow than a promise. Whatever society deems scandal, whatever condemnation they may deliver, I will bear it in your stead. You and he are mine to protect, now and always. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the torrent of emotion that threatened to overtake her carefully curated composure. Months of waiting, of isolation, of uncertainty, had led to this singular moment, and the Duke's presence, his words, and the implicit acknowledgement of responsibility stirred something within her she had not allowed herself to feel. Cautious, fragile hope. You speak of protection, she said quietly, yet what of the world outside these walls? Can your resolve truly withstand the scrutiny, the gossip, the judgments that seek to tear apart all we have rebuilt? He approached closer now, careful, deliberate, and yet unflinching. The distance closed between them, but he did not intrude, he did not overstep. He merely offered presence, the unspoken assurance that he would stand as witness, guardian, and ally. It must, he said, voice low and resolute. I have faltered once, allowed pride and society's expectations to dictate my actions. Never again. I will confront every whisper, every glance, every insinuation. Your dignity, your safety, and his life will not be compromised while I draw breath. Evelyn studied him, measuring his words against the history they shared. She had seen his pride, his imperiousness, his capacity for cruelty cloaked in decorum. And yet, in this moment, there was an undeniable sincerity, a raw and vulnerable truth that shone brighter than any social convention, brighter even than the fear that had haunted her for months. She lowered the child slightly, just enough for her eyes to meet his fully. And what of us? She whispered, the question heavy, fragile, almost forbidden in its audacity. He paused, as though weighing every syllable, every consequence. We, he began, and the weight of his voice carried the full measure of his confession, must navigate what remains of the world with care. But we shall do so together. Whatever judgment, whatever peril awaits, we will face it side by side. That much, I swear. The infant stirred in her arms, a tiny, imperfect miracle, and Evelyn felt a shiver of both relief and apprehension. This child, born of secrecy, suffering, and endurance, was now a living testament to their intertwined fates. And yet the fragility of the moment reminded her that the path ahead was uncharted, that society's relentless gaze still lingered, that whispers of scandal would not vanish with declarations or vows. She began, faltering, and the Duke reached forward, hand extended, though not touching, offering a bridge across the chasm of months and sorrow. I do not know if the world will allow us peace, she continued, but I can feel the weight of your words, the promise in your eyes, and, perhaps, finally, a measure of trust returns. His hand hovered near hers, close enough for warmth, close enough for the unspoken connection between them to hum quietly, but never pressing, never assuming. Trust, he murmured, is all I ask. That, and the chance to prove that even in a world intent on division, love, loyalty, and courage can endure. You and he are my heart now, Evelyn. You are my charge, and I shall not fail you again. Tears, unbidden but welcome, pricked at the corners of her eyes. Months of solitude, of quiet suffering, of whispered letters and clandestine gifts, had led to this moment of reckoning. She had endured the world's judgment alone, preserved her dignity, and now, finally, faced the man who had both caused and sought to amend her suffering. She lowered the child fully into her arms, feeling the steady, fragile rhythm of life and hope, and in that simple, profound act, allowed herself to feel a fleeting, dangerous thrill of relief. The world beyond may still speak, she said, voice firmer now, strengthened by the acknowledgement of shared responsibility and cautious hope. But within these walls, in this moment, we claim what is ours. And I shall no longer stand alone. He inclined his head, a shadow of the old imperiousness softened by reverence and quiet awe. Then we begin anew, he said, voice resonant, not as society dictates nor as rumor decrees but as we choose. Together. And yet, even as the words hung between them, triumphant and solemn, the faint echo of distant carriage wheels and murmuring voices drifted from beyond the estate. The world outside had not paused, had not forgotten, and would not wait. Evelyn's pulse quickened, a subtle tremor threading through the fragile moment of victory. They were reunited, yet the storm of society, rumor, and expectation still lingered, waiting for the next step, the next choice, the next test of courage and loyalty. As the Duke stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers, and the infant stirred quietly in her arms, Evelyn realized with a mixture of fear and wonder that the greatest challenge had not been endured in isolation, nor measured in absence. It lay ahead in the confrontation with the world that had sought to destroy them, in the delicate negotiation of love and duty, and in the quiet, unwavering promise that for all its peril, they would face it together. And in that charged, suspended moment, a fragile thought took root, that the miracle she cradled in her arms was not only a child of their blood, but a symbol of endurance, defiance, and the enduring power of hearts that refused to break, even when society demanded it. And that thought, both terrifying and exhilarating, whispered of reckonings yet to come, of challenges yet unmet, and of a love that could neither be denied nor entirely contained.